Welcome to the New Mormon Truth, video number 17, a review of A Case for the Book of Mormon by Tad R. Callister, and this is part 1. So this is just my thoughts after reading A Case for the Book of Mormon. This is not a rebuttal to the book, just my thoughts after reading it. A summary, or maybe my synopsis, is this is a good general overview. It's a good book for members who are new to Book of Mormon issues. It scratches the surface. It doesn't get too far into the weeds. And for more in-depth information on Book of Mormon issues and other issues, or maybe if you're in a faith crisis, I would recommend Shaken Faith Syndrome by Michael Ash. And I ask you to please subscribe if you like these videos, and if you also like the videos, please hit like. So the premise of A Case for the Book of Mormon is, Callister puts it, the primary purpose of this book is to present a case for the Book of Mormon both intellectually and spiritually. So we're going to cover those. And then he goes on to say, the Book of Mormon is either a divine work or a fraud. Either Joseph Smith received golden plates containing a record of the Nephites, or he did not. So basically it's he received the record or he didn't. Either Nephi, Alma, or Moroni lived as prophets of God in ancient America, or they were fictional characters. Basically it boils down to the Book of Mormon is either historical or not historical. And he plans to show it to us both intellectually and spiritually. So spiritual witness, he goes on to say, the greatest and most crucial witness of the divinity of the Book of Mormon is the Spirit. Secondary, or scientific as I interpret it, evidences can be wonderful supplements to our testimonies, but they do not replace or supersede the witness of the Spirit. Now, my video number 1, I talked about how the Spirit is an unreliable determinant of truth because, 1, error. Did you feel the Spirit, or was that your feelings? The impressions are too subjective. Or you could receive the wrong impression. 2, there's a large amount of religious disagreement, meaning, and this should be disagreement, not agreement. People of all faiths have spiritual experiences and know their particular faith, including leaders and religious books, are true. They can't all be right, meaning if you talk to your evangelical friend, they're going to describe very similar experiences of what you're having of feeling the Spirit. Your only options are you're both feeling the Spirit, or maybe they're being deceived by the devil, but how is that? You ask people to pray about the Book of Mormon, they get a feeling. So they're getting the same feeling. So whether it's the Spirit, their feelings, or the devil, pick one. So basically this is prone to error and disagreement because people are in error. Maybe you can say that. So to me, the witness of the Spirit is subjective. Callister goes on to say, pages 15 and 16, once we have a foundational testimony of the Book of Mormon as confirmed by the Spirit, then any question or challenge we confront in life, however difficult it may seem, can be approached with faith, not doubt. So to me, this is, I'm going to say, sorry, I'm not going to accept this, or maybe maybe this is how people hold on to their testimony. They say, well, geez, that's a real good issue, like DNA in the Book of Mormon. I believe the Book of Mormon is true, therefore there must be a reason, and you'll latch on to any reason as long as it makes the Book of Mormon true. Instead, you should be looking at the facts, because even the Bible dictionary says all true faith must be based upon, this is, faith, testimonies, faith-driven. All true faith must be based upon correct knowledge, or it cannot produce the desired results. And just giving you an example, we've all had that, sort of going back to my spiritual witness thing. You've probably had your friends talk some crazy stuff about God telling them this and God telling them that, and in the back of your mind going, no way. Let's say one of your friends came and said, God told me only to eat peanut butter. Well, And they were dead serious. Well, you know that eating peanut butter all the time was not really good for your body. So, you know, it has to be based upon correct knowledge. This is where I'm going, is that you have to look at the facts, meaning this person should have known, looking into it, that peanut butter, just eating peanut butter is not good for them. Therefore, God is not going to tell them to eat peanut butter. That's where I'm going with this. So you have to base your faith upon correct knowledge, just not upon what you're feeling. This is what the Bible Dictionary says. So that's just a restatement of what I just said. So then Callister goes into, or Tad R. Callister goes into some, I think about 5 arguments or theories about Book of Mormon authorship. And he says critics must either accept Joseph Smith's account, namely that he translated it, meaning the Book of Mormon, by the gift and power of God, or produce a viable alternative. That's on page 16. Well, sorry, no. It's the church that makes the assertion that it's inspired. Therefore, the church has the burden of proof. Just think if your friend walked up to you and he handed you a book and said, this is inspired of God, and you said, I don't think so. And he said, well, you have to prove to me that it's not. Well, this is just the flip side of that, right? So they're saying, no, it's you have to believe it or show a viable alternative. No, you have to show me that this book was produced by, that it cannot be produced naturally, meaning this wasn't produced by Joseph Smith in the environment or whatever. There isn't an actual logical explanation that the only way he could have done this was by divine, by the gift and power of God. So you would have to show me, how is it only by the gift and power of God? Give me the circumstances. So we're going to look at these things about, can we find a naturalistic explanation, not a divine explanation for the Book of Mormon? So because non-believers and critics don't accept the Book of Mormon to be divinely inspired, they know someone had to write it. So who wrote it? Now Callister gets into this, and he covers, I think, 4 or 5 theories. His argument number 1 is Joseph Smith wrote it as an ignorant man. Now here I say his argument on about 2 pages is muddled, meaning Callister refers to an 1831 quote by Alexander Campbell, who will pop up in the next video, saying Joseph Smith wrote it. And then Callister suddenly shifts to early theories about the origin of the Book of Mormon focused on the premise that Joseph Smith, an unlearned man, was simply incapable of writing such a complex book. When we get down to one of the next explanations, I'll explain this. Basically what happened is that another theory popped up in 1833, and it became the predominant theory, and I'll get there. But the people did see Joseph Smith as unlearned or ignorant or not capable of writing the Book of Mormon. Argument number 2, someone else wrote it. Then people start saying, well, if Joseph Smith didn't write it, who wrote it? And a couple of theories, Callister proposes or talks about Oliver Cowdery. He talks about Sidney Rigdon. If you don't know who Sidney Rigdon is basically Joseph Smith's right-hand man from about 1831 or December 1830 until his death, or maybe shortly before his death. He doesn't mention, but I'm going to mention it, Lucy, this is his mother, Joseph Sr., Hiram, his brother. I've been proposed, or I've read those. Parley Pratt was with Sidney Rigdon in Ohio. Now we know it's not Rigdon or Pratt because these two did not meet Joseph Smith until after the Book of Mormon was published. So it's not these two, even though people can assert it. There's really no evidence that it's Rigdon or Pratt. Cowdery, sure, maybe. But if I had to pick somebody, meaning if you came up to me and said, if Joseph Smith didn't write it, who did? I'd probably say that my bet would be, not that I'm 100% this way, I would say probably Lucy wrote it. I don't think Smith Sr. wrote it, or Hiram. He could have. Might have been Lucy than Hiram. I think if it wasn't written by Joseph Smith, it was written by someone in his family, would be my guess, from the contents. Meaning, someone was familiar with the Smith family dynamics and their religious knowledge or feelings that would not have probably been Cowdery. That's why I say it's one of the Smiths. Number 3, Joseph Smith plagiarized the Book of Mormon. And like I said, starting in 1833, there's this a book called Mormonism Unveiled, which came out with the sort of the Solomon Spaulding theory. Basically, I think it was I forget who it was, but basically an early missionary went around, was preaching the gospel, ran across these people going, "Oh, that Book of Mormon sounds like this manuscript that Solomon Spaulding wrote." This was what started. Then he went around, this missionary, I think lost his testimony, lost the church, went around and collected, or had someone go around and collect these affidavits about, oh yes, no, we have, no, that is, that Book of Mormon, that's Solomon Spaulding's manuscript. People probably believe this for 100 years or longer. People still believe it now. But basically, if you don't know, it looks like this guy actually did find the manuscript and never produced it. Why? Because he found the manuscript, the guy that came up with these affidavits or published this book, because it didn't match. Well, I think this guy died and someone bought his papers, and then later on in life, I don't know if it was the 1880s, could have been in the 1900s, someone found it. And it was compared to the Book of Mormon, and guess what? No, it did not match the Book of Mormon. So Joseph Smith did not plagiarize from the Solomon Spaulding manuscript. So the other one Callister talks about is A View of the Hebrews, which was written by Ethan Smith, no relationship to the Smiths. First edition published 1823, second edition published 1825. This guy actually lived in the area right near Joseph Smith, and this guy, Ethan Smith, or Oliver Cowdery, went to this guy's church or parish or whatever it is. So, Callister does say critics have claimed that View of the Hebrews provided the basic framework of the Book of Mormon. Now, this is under plagiarism. It seems like Callister, when he talks about plagiarism, is talking about like direct copying, like copying large chunks of text or complete stories. But here he lumps in this, I guess you can call it thematic borrowing. But then he has another argument where that's people talk, where he uses View of the Hebrews too. So I'm a little confused on his argument with View of the Hebrews under plagiarism. To me, he was going for more like direct copying of large chunks of text when he was talking about plagiarism here, not borrowing of themes. But he talks about it here. And he also says, so it is with the View of the Hebrews in the Book of Mormon. There are some parallels because on occasion, these two books are referring to similar historical and religious events, but there's no connection. No, I wonder, similar historical events. So hold on, the Book of Mormon purports to be a history of, of the Americas, or at least that's what most members think. And if you talk to the LDS scholars, they're saying a very small area of the Americas. So how would View of the Hebrews know about this history if it had sort of been lost? Especially, it makes more sense that maybe he would know about a larger history, but not a smaller history. Now, if you don't know what I'm talking about, I'll get into the geographical models later, but let this sink in for a little bit. How would View of the Hebrews know about this similar historical stories? So next, we know 4. Joseph Smith had a mental disorder. When I saw that, I wanted to skip the entire section, but decided to read it anyways. Sort of preposterous theory. They're saying Smith had schizophrenia or childhood trauma and narcissistic personality disorder. But then Callister does say this argument never got much traction. Yeah. So why do you even put it in there? It's a minor theory. It seems like maybe he's just trying to add one. Now, I do admit that there were some childhood influences. When I read this reminded me of childhood influences on Joseph Smith. One is leg surgery in 1812 or 13. Joseph Smith was poor. There was a religious disagreement between Smith Sr. and Lucy. So they didn't see eye to eye in religion. And Joseph was probably a narcissist. Now, I had concluded this. I think after reading Fawn Brody's No Man Knows My History that Smith was a narcissist, but only until later, until a scholar actually called him a narcissist too, that it actually started confirming that maybe I was on the right track, because him being a narcissist makes a lot of sense now. A lot of leaders will have narcissistic qualities about them, but possibly Smith was a narcissist. I'm not making a diagnosis, but when I've looked up, narcissism, I'm not saying he had narcissistic personality disorder. I'm just saying he was a narcissist. Makes things that he did, his behavior starts to make a lot more sense. Number 4, Joseph Smith is creative genius. I would take out genius, even though this is his title. I just say Joseph Smith was creative. So Callister says this is a theory that Joseph Smith researched and read a substantial number of books and other local resources. Now, I disagree with this. There are critics who will say, "Oh, look, he probably all these books he probably went in and all these different resources and maybe got little bits and pieces of information from anywhere." That isn't what the theory, what critics are saying, or there may be a group of critics that think that he's getting little bits and pieces from everywhere. What they're really saying is that he lived in that time, so he was picking up from the environment, maybe a couple books that he read, and from conversations, bits and pieces of everything, and he sort of put this all together in a story. This is sort of how, when someone writes, I've actually written fiction, this is how fiction writers work. They will do some research, they will do some reading, but then they just make it up. All that sort of, all this information with what their experience in life, what their views are, what's going on in society, what little research they've done. And if you actually, I've written a screenplay, they basically say to spend no more than a week researching stuff, and then just start writing. So this is probably what's happening. Smith he's just sort of assembled various information from different places. That finally went down and saying, "Oh, I got to write something about Alma," and he's going over somewhere and doing some research and writing. Isn't what's going on. So where did he get his information from? Well, the Bible. Callister doesn't mention the Bible. He mentions the Apocrypha, which is those books that are in the Catholic Bible but not in the Protestant Bible. He doesn't mention the Bible, but the Bible's the main source. I mean, he quotes portions of Isaiah, or portions of Isaiah are in the Book of Mormon. So clear the Bible. View of the Hebrews. We already mentioned this one. So, so here he talks about, using information from View of the Hebrews. Now later on in this book, he talks about what he calls the unparallels, and we'll probably get there, about things that don't match in View of the Hebrews. So all that are, what the critics' assertion is that this might have provided a basic framework, or there's some parallels here, some ideas that he got about Indian origins. Wonders of Nature, there's also another book on Indian origins. The Golden Pot, I forget, this is like maybe some guy, like a translator, I don't, maybe he had a friend that read it, and I don't know, I don't put a lot of weight into this one. The Late War, and then I'm going to put up here in the first book of Napoleon. Now, he does, like I said, later talk about these unparallels, meaning a lot of people will point out parallels, but it is interesting to note, as he pointed out, there's things that are not parallels. So, but I don't think this is happening. View of the Hebrews could provide a framework, a basic framework, an idea, but the Late War in the first book of Napoleon might be providing stylistic wording, meaning these were written, as I believe, in the scriptural style. So, the Book of Mormon is written in the King James English, so it has sort of a King James language. These two books are written in sort of a King James English. So it'd be interesting to find out if there's, like, let's say a 5-word exact pattern in the Book of Mormon that matches the Late War. Is that phrase in the Bible? If it's not, then it might be an influence from the Late War. If you find a number of these, then it's a strong indicator. If they're, Let's say these 5-word phrases, multiple of them, let's say 20 or 100 or something. I don't know what the number needs to be, but if you find those and they're in the Book of Mormon and not in the Bible, this is an indication that he may not be borrowing the stories from there, but he might have read this book, and since he's imitating the scriptural style and he's having to come up with his scriptural style language and he's read it before, these phrases may pop into his head. Not that he's gone and looked them up. Because we, in English, things come out in certain phrases. So basically, this would provide more of a possibly stylistic help, or he read it and was influenced by it. And then it lists over 150 books on Native Americans. Really, this is excuse me, this references to a Dan Vogel book. Dan Vogel was just trying to point out that in the early 1800s, there are a lot of books about Native American origins that match the Book of Mormon, or very similar. So Smith could easily gotten these ideas from a number of books. And just so you know, not all these books agree on the theories of what happened. So newspapers, we know that Joseph Smith's father took the newspaper, so the Smiths probably read it. So, he could have been influenced by what he's reading in the paper. And conversations, people talk about stuff. So maybe Smith, didn't read the Natures of Wonder, but maybe his neighbor did, and maybe Smith read View of the Hebrews, and they were talking one day or a couple of days about what's going on. Then you have people talking about various things, and maybe this is where Smith got ideas, or maybe this guy had a different take. So we're just saying people were talking about it. If Vogel can find 150 books, people were probably talking about this. I also talk about View of the Hebrews had an 1823 and an 1825 edition that shows that the book was popular. Someone was reading it in his neighborhood. So, and I maybe want to point out that Smith found the golden plates, and all of a sudden everybody knew the golden plates were, he had the golden plates. Why? Because people talk. This clearly shows people were talking. So revival meetings, we know Joseph Smith was attending a revival meeting, so he got influences from there, wording. So when you come across, King Benjamin's speech, this has been purported to be very similar to some revival speech. So we know he went to revivals, and they were based on the Bible, right? So then he has this long quote about Callister has, does anyone honestly expect us to believe that Joseph Smith, as an unlearned man of age 23, now Smith was not unlearned completely. He probably had between 3 and 7 years of formal education. By comparison, Abraham Lincoln, who's a contemporary, had about a year's worth of formal education. So, there wasn't a public school system here. And this actually warrants a whole nother video about, Smith probably had limited formal education. His dad was a school teacher. His mother, his grandmother was a school teacher. His parents, were schooled, the day. Not that they went to college. And then he searched out and studied all these resources. And no, he might have just read one or two and had conversations with his neighbors. Oh, and inhaled the related conversations? Yeah, that's very possible. What do you think, this guy's just working and going home and sleeping? Ferret out all the facts? No, when you're talking, you're automatically ferreting out all the facts. Not that he's cross-referencing everything. He reads it, he believes it, or he doesn't. And organize the remainder into an intricate story involving hundreds of characters, numerous locations, detailed word strategies. Critics have disputed that the Book of Mormon is actually an intricate story. Doctrinal gems, we'll get into that. And then dictated it with perfect recollection without any notes whatsoever, no outline. This presupposes that he wrote it out or memorized it all, or maybe that he wrote it all out and then memorized it and then dictated it. It isn't what happened. He's doing this what they call oral composition. Back then people were much more into rhetoric. Only until about, I think, the end of the 19th century did focus on writing become more paramount. So people studied more of rhetoric, talking, in those days. So to say that we know it, and he was talking about the golden plate since about 1823. So he had 6, 7 years to think about the story. and to sort of compose it in his head. And then Callister talks about this 60-day of composition. That's how long it took him to dictate it. So he could have come up with a story all in his head and then dictate in 65 days. The example I like to use is I saw a lecture by Stephen King, the novelist, who says basically he composes his books, or comes up with an idea, then he composes a story and then plays it like a movie in his head, and he'll fix parts, etc., etc., and he keeps just playing it over and over until he gets the whole story down, and then he writes it. This is what Smith could have done. He could just rummage it around in his head and then dictate it all out. Now, proof of this could be, we know that in the very beginning he dictated 116 pages that were lost. Then he had this commandment not to redo it. Well, is Smith, he's saying he had perfect recollection. Well, no, this is probably evidence that he dictated it. It didn't come from notes, that he just had the story in his head. And then he was just sort of there was no exact wording, that he had these basic ideas. And then he was just telling the story and it's being dictated. Interesting to note that the Book of Mormon has evidence of just being a dictation. So if he was translating from a record, a written record, people usually write differently. If you were just reading what was written on the gold plates, it doesn't come off that he's like reading written information, that he's doing an oral dictation. Just another proof that it's dictation. So I believe that is it for this video. I will see you in part 2.